questions.
Yeah, so recently I've noticed I have this intent to study Dharma, and I want to have that as like the priority. But I've had some other things on my mind that seem to come in the way, and that are preoccupying my mind and making it difficult to study, to like read the Avatamsaka, for example.
Okay, what kind of things?
So there's one main thing. Recently, with family, I visited my parents last weekend.
That's always interesting.
Yeah, and I know there's a few things there. There's one. I'm feeling I've got this like conflict of I live far away from family, and I'm in a point in my life where I'm thinking about maybe like I want to settle somewhere and having to choose a place to do that, and one of the options would be like being close to family, and I love my family very much, and so there's like a pull there. But then it seems every time I go and I visit family, there's a big push to be further away, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
And so it just feels like there's that conflict there, and it's hard to resolve it.
Is it a conflict, or is it more subtle than that? Well, for example, one of the things I've noticed after a lifetime of practicing,
mm-hmm.
In this case psychiatry, or just observing people, but more than that, observing myself, there's a tendency towards regression when one goes home,
right?
Especially if one's been away for a while. So, is that something that happens?
I've noticed that in the past. I mean, this recent trip was too short of a trip to have that, I think. But, well, if I think about this recent trip, I think just traveling in general and being away, like disrupting my routines, kind of gives me some regression in terms of having like constant practices and stuff, and my sleep gets disrupted, and I'll.
Okay, well, is there any reason to make this decision right now?
No, but it's on my mind.
Well, that's the first thing, right?
Yeah. And then
there's a lot to be said for both alternatives, but you don't have to decide now.
Yeah.
And just be grateful that you're not forced at the moment, because our parents get old and they get sick.
Right.
And so sometimes there's not a choice in the matter, in which case. So a lot of this seems to fall in the category of I use the word fantasy, but that's only to signal that it's just a creation of the mind. Entirely. No one's forcing you to make that decision now, and circumstances will change with the passage of time. And to change, it's not unlikely for them to change so significantly that the decision is made for you, one way or the other.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think that's kind of like just leaking energy.
Yeah. I think the only thing around where like I need a decision is, well, I've thought about, purchasing a house, and that's a bit of a commitment.
Okay, well.
So there is a decision on like whether or not to do that, at least for the next few years.
Okay, so how does that affect Dharma practice? See, one of the most important parts of Dharma practice is to study your own mind.
Right.
And if you'll notice, the mind creates all kinds of conundrums and problems and issues.
Yes, I very much noticed. Yeah.
Okay. So now, where did those come from?
Right. So some of those are like real problems that you have to deal with, right? Like if there's, snakes in your house, you gotta get rid of the snakes. But then, as you're saying, some of them are leaks, and so how do you determine which one's which?
I don't think it's that difficult. I mean, with regard to the snakes, you said it yourself.
Right.
So the name of the game is to drive all efforts into one, to realize that anything that comes up is part of a teaching configuration. And the only question is, what are you going to learn from this configuration?
Mm.
If you look back over your life, you're not very old, but you can still look back and see many times when your mind was wrapped up in something that was really intense at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you can barely remember what it was.
Yeah.
All right. So the mind is like that.
Yeah.
And so watching it, I mean, this is just as good as, reading a teaching tale, is watching your own mind create these conflicts or conundrums or dilemmas or whatever,
mm-hmm.
and then realizing that where they come from, and then watching them just sink back into the Dharmakaya, or the sky-like nature of mind.
Mm.
The sky-like, like the sky nature of mind. Though that's how the Tibetan Buddhists formulated it anyway. So, okay, good. Now, if it was snakes, if we were talking about snakes, and we knew that they were poisonous snakes or vipers, then we probably wouldn't even be having this discussion. You'd be getting rid of the snakes.
Right. Yeah, and that the other area there that's been on my mind is like I think, and I don't know, this might be because I've been reading on Twitter too much, following too much news, but I've been following like the Canadian election politics, and then I was arguing with my parents about some things as well.
Oh, correct. So yeah, the Twitter can be a mind killer, no question.
Mm-hmm.
And it can also be an incredible leak of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And worse than that, it can also stimulate you with just almost incessant negativity.
Yeah.
If not the content, the stupidity of the people posting the content. And so it's many times it's a real lose-lose proposition. And so you may decide, I don't know, but you may decide to spend less time on social media and see how you feel and see how you do.
Mm-hmm.
Many people feel that less time on social media actually adds to their well-being.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the other hand, there's no better way to keep up with what's happening with AI, or in science. And there's a lot happening in AI and science. So, it's just something that's like the world, right?
Yeah.
Which Jesus called an old hag. Did you remember reading that anywhere where Jesus?
No, I don't.
Looked, it was walking along the road with somebody. This isn't in the Christian, but it's in the Muslim Chronicles of Jesus, and I think it's fairly well validated. And he turns to the person he's walking with, who's been commenting about the world or politics or something, and he says something along the lines of, "I don't know how anybody could get infatuated with this old hag," right? Referring to the world.
Mm-hmm.
I need to find that reference. But anyway, okay, so yeah, the world is a very double-edged sword.
Yeah. Yeah, regarding that, like the past couple of days, I found myself just being very frustrated when I was arguing with my parents about a few things.
It's been known to happen.
Yeah, but it reminded me of like during COVID, when it seemed there was just so much like brainwashing going on, and it felt like when everybody I talked to was like gaslighting me in a way.
Correct.
Yeah.
But they didn't know they were agents of a larger, darker force that they didn't realize what had happened. And this was something far more pernicious because it was the governments doing it to their peoples, right? And so that's not just social media; that's the law, right? And no one was on the streets, and nobody could talk about if they didn't agree with the governments. And so again, the world doesn't work; it never has, and I don't want to say it, but so the world doesn't work. Put it that way. It's not designed to work at that level.
Right.
At other levels, it's working perfectly. I mean, it's just perfectly working. But that's not the level of the normal, of the usual human consciousness. So don't let it drive you mad, because it will.
Yeah. So, in an instance like this, do you recommend just taking space from it?
Sure. At least to see what it, at least to notice the effect on your well-being.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I mean, we used to have newspapers, right? We used to have magazines that, were ostensibly worth reading. But all of that stuff is gone. I mean, we used to have people who would think, good thinkers, who would offer opinions. And most of that is all gone.
Yeah. And so when I observe my mind, I notice there's just like such a urge to correct people.
Yeah, that's
when I see something illogical, it's like there's such
people do not respond to logic. There's very few people that would respond to logic. This is a matter of common experience. By the way, when I say there used to be people who wrote thoughtfully, etc., I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if we went back and really looked at it, that if not 85% of those people were also equally inane.
Right.
Okay, so that's, I'm not hearkening back to a better age.
Right.
Yeah, you cannot convince people with logic. I mean, if you look at the Sufi treatises on this subject, they say you can use repetition and emotion and sticks and carrots and group mentalities and the contagion of the group, and you can use tribal loyalties. You can use all kinds of things, but you can't really use reason and logic. It's just not gonna. It just doesn't work for the vast majority of people.
Right.
Remember the story where Idris Shah, the great 20th century Sufi teacher, went to I think he was in Morocco, and he had his wife with him, and he was haggling over the price of some garment, some kind of, not a poncho, but some kind of shawl or something like that. And of course, the merchant suggested way too high a price, and then suddenly he lowered the price on his own or something like that. And Idris Shah said, "Come on, man, what are you doing? You know that's not how it works." "Well, sir, it's because of your wife. She's pregnant, and I'm scared she'll give me the evil eye." To which Shah says, "Come on, man, you know as well as I do, that's all just a bunch of mythology and pregnant women, a bunch of superstition, and pregnant women don't give the evil eye." And the guy said, "Well, yes, I know that, and you know that. We both know that. But still," Shah wrote it really much better, but basically he just said, "Okay, it's not just a matter of what I believe." Right. So there are features of the human that are deeply irrational, and you can just walk around and you can see it every day. And so the world is not like as we were taught it was.
Right.
So in terms of talking people out of things, I think as you get older and you lose more and more. I mean, after you've had the experience of losing that battle repeatedly, you'll see that you can't really talk most people into anything. Unless they already want to believe it or something like that.
Right.
Just, for example, another example is just watch a debate.
Yeah.
A charge debate. I saw a debate between someone and someone else at the Harvard Faculty Club. And at the end of it all, everyone who believed one way thought that their person had won. And everybody believed the other way thought their person had won. So reason and logic are grossly overrated tools by people who, like myself, who grew up, thinking these were, important things.
Right.
And they are important, but just in a special audience.
Right.
Specialized audience. Okay, another question? Are we finished with that?
Yeah. Well, I think related to that, there's like, I think I've sort of realized this on my own as well, because I have when I think about the world, I mean, when I just contemplate almost anything, I realize I have no idea how anything works, right?
Correct.
There's very few things I deeply understand, and even the things I deeply understand, if I go deeper, I don't understand it.
Correct, and that's why it's important in this human life for us to set priorities in things that we're going to attempt to understand.
Right.
I was, just because it came up somewhere or another, I looked into the pathophysiology of eclampsia, preeclampsia and eclampsia. Do you know what that is?
No, what's that?
That's a toxemia that occurs in pregnant women. Very serious. And in the old days, people used to die from it, right?
Okay.
And some still do if they don't get adequate medical diagnostic care and treatment. But so I asked it the pathophysiology, and it has no idea. It goes into some weird, world of this and that, and I won't bore you with it. But the thing is, there's so much that we don't understand about this world, in fact. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing that's nice about it is if we can approximate it with binary code, if we can approximate the infinite. I mean, we don't understand causality. Mm-hmm. Zeno's paradox still stands, right? Mm-hmm. We don't know whether Parmenides was right or Heraclitus was right or both were right.
Yeah. And there's so many things we take for granted that's been set up for us by previous generations.
Precisely.
And I've noticed now
there's a painful lesson of old age that's the case. But go ahead.
Well, there's a trend now kind of dismantling and dismissing things that have been set up for us, almost especially in the political realm in terms of systems and laws, but also religious value and religion and just values.
Correct, and we'll see whether the Sufis say, before you get rid of the cat, make allowances for the mice, right? Mm-hmm. Very good advice. That's a very nice little saying to have in the back of your mind. Before you get rid of the cat, make allowances for the mice. So if we as a culture decide we're going to get rid of religion, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then what do we propose to put in its place? Because the places that did outlaw religion, for example, Soviet Russia and communist China, ended up with death by starvation of literally, I don't know, on the order of several score millions of people. Mm-hmm. And so that's an experiment, and we can try it, although it has been tried before. Now, I'm not saying that I endorse religion one way or the other. I'm just saying that it serves a function.
Right.
And one of those is to instill values.
Right.
So in a culture that has no values, that's just floating around, what kind of trust can there be? And societies must run on trust. What kind of trust can there be with no values and no? Again, I'm not supporting religion for the hell of it. I'm saying, and no religion to instill those values. Mm-hmm. Now you could say, well, wait a minute, this is a secular country. We're talking about America in this case. And the founding fathers, were secularists or whatever. But that's not true.
Right, they weren't.
They were highly religious men. At the same time, also they talk about the Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. The Enlightenment requires strict rationality and this and that. That's not true either. Dude was, he was cracked.
Right.
Leibniz too, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not being derogatory for those geniuses. I'm just saying that if you think they weren't mystical or spiritual, you're just wrong.
Right.
And I suspect that's true of our today's scientists, but we can't talk about it because it's very much out of vogue. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of like shooting your society in the foot for the hell of it. All this gaslighting.
Yeah. And you mentioned trust. Especially with AI, trust is going to become more difficult, but also more important, I think.
Absolutely. And so there'll probably be a revival of spirituality, at least, and maybe religion as well. Right, when faced with extraordinary uncertainty and mortality.
Yeah, say more how religion can help with that, because it's not immediately apparent how it would help.
Religion uses the wisdom of the ages to set up structures in which to live one's life. Mm. And these structures, which are, admittedly, I don't know, they're arbitrary, one could say. Mm-hmm. But there are ways of codifying acceptable and unacceptable behaviors in a large number of hairless primates, right? Mm-hmm. And we know that if we revert to the majority of our brain is indistinguishable from that of a primate. I mean, it is primate.
Yeah. But
that we revert to horrible things, Yeah. And so the point is, but that's not the only reason for religion. Now I'm thinking of Buddhism, I'm thinking of Taoism, I'm thinking of Confucianism, I'm not just thinking of the Abrahamics, right? Mm-hmm. And what they do is they give a shared common view that you could argue people need in large numbers. Mm. And without that, it's chaos and madness and attempts to control that chaos, like what happened in communist China. They decided to destroy their entire heritage, to destroy every artifact of their history and all their literature and everything. They just burned everything. And we see how that turned out, right? Mm. Now they're scrambling to put something back. And the same thing's true in Russia. Russia's now run by a guy who calls himself Christian and who's a big supporter of the churches and all the iconography and all of the whole, because they tried doing it without it. And it, just empirically, it doesn't work.
Right.
And that's why people like Dawkins and the Four Horsemen of atheism or whatever, those guys just haven't thought further than basically an ideological position, which is something like, well, I don't believe in God and nobody else should either, because there's horrible things that have been done by religion in the past and they're likely to do it again. Okay. But again, before you get rid of the cat, make allowances for the mice.
Right.
And I don't know if you trust these AIs, but I'm having less and less confidence in them because I use about 4 or 5 different ones.
Yep.
And if you get them on any subject that's touchy, they defer to the mass media.
Yeah. So there's
not a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because the AIs are trained on things, and you have to ask, like, well, what's the source of truth? And this is an area where I want to learn more about, because when I think about it, it seems like truth can come from trusted sources, or it can come from consensus, but none of there's
I don't know. Does truth ever come from consensus? Even scientific truth, or especially scientific truth.
Not scientific, but things like.
Well, okay, but just so my experience has been, well, the scientific consensus is this on scientific subjects, right? The AI expects me to take that seriously.
Yeah.
Like, go ahead.
Things like, did the Rangers win the game? You could ask different people, but there's like trusted sources. There's maybe official websites.
Right, but you could also. Okay, so then let's go further and say, did the Rangers throw the game?
Right, and that consensus probably can't work. But that one is like there might be specific people who can speak authoritatively on it.
Exactly. And so, yes, there are some data points, like how much is 100 billion, the interest on 100 billion over such and such a period of time, doing this. Yeah, so certain data points we've agreed on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did they win this game or lose this game?
And then with regards to the AI, there's an interesting one where the answer is going to be what people like or expect because of the way it's trained, rather than what's yes. true. And in some cases, that will be what's true, but in other cases, it won't.
And so how can you trust it?
Yeah. But that's how can you trust anyone, right? Like,
correct.
These
correct. Are AI or human.
Yeah, I think the idea or the information that persists in the AI seems to persist in the same way that it persists in humans or in other media or other information, like vaults or whatever, right?
Correct.
It
no,
persists.
I don't want to. Yeah, go ahead.
It persists if it's useful to people, right? If it's useful, it'll stay alive, essentially.
Yeah, was it useful to believe that Catherine the Great, messed around with horses sexually? It must have been, because that's, everybody knows that she did, right?
I'm not familiar with that.
Catherine the Great of Russia was thought to have copulated with a horse.
Okay.
Of course, I mean, it was almost a matter of fact, but the thing is, it was also, of course, the propaganda, I believe, of the Bolsheviks who were trying to get rid of the royal family. So who knows, right?
Right.
Was Nixon set up by the CIA? I mean, and this is another problem, and that's why my counsel is for people to go deeper if they're looking for truth. And then they start to realize that the whole thing is a narrative and an illusory on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only place you'll find any peace, and you won't find it in this world. You might for a while, maybe for a couple of years running, but it's not going to last, no matter what it is.
Mm.
And so, and the other place where we can find truth, if you want truth, just walk outside and look at a field of green, or look at some trees, or this. There are sources of truth, but they're not in the minds of men.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe, and this is why I teach this, the best way to deal with the circumstances that we're faced with is to understand the nature of one's own mind, the minds of others, and not just how well they can trick us, which they can, but also to understand what's behind the mind, what's behind nature.
Mm.
And that, of course, is a touchy enterprise. Not many people are cut out for it or inclined that way, unfortunately.
You had a tweet this morning about intimacy with all things.
Yes.
Can you say more about that?
Well, Dojin, the great Japanese poet and Zen master wrote that, and it was hard to write because it had the word "things" at the end, right?
Okay.
Or like its intimacy with all phenomenon.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're a mature mind, you don't pick and choose what you are going to let in or not let in. You're going to use whatever it might be as your teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I was walking around in Harvard Square one day, and a big, huge construction crane fell over and landed on this poor construction worker and just cut him in half.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was a horrible thing to watch. And, I don't want to speak too much about what I learned from it, but I'm still learning from it. And the thing is, we can, whatever it is, we have to understand that it's interpreted through the mind. It's reified by the mind. And it's here to teach or to help or to be there for to get one closer to reality, right? And reality is not found in the narratives of man or in the in books either. It's found by the individual, and it's the and we can only get so close to it. Also,
mm-hmm. And by intimacy, does this mean like just paying attention?
It means being comfortable with and not selecting, and being intimacy with all things that you it's an aspiration, but it's an achievable aspiration to whatever it is. You just don't push it away. Now, beyond that, the 99% of this world, you can be intimate with it more than 99% if you're far enough evolved. Like, one of the things that I use as a practice is I see people, especially in politics, that I really cannot abide, right? These people are like, ah!
Right.
But learning to love them as yourself.
Right.
See, that's a worthy practice. So trying to be intimate with that is not easy. But the true student tries anyway.
Yep.
You see? You follow?
Yep. Yeah.
And the mind is a horrible thing to have, deciding all this stuff. What's good and bad, what's beautiful and what's not, and all these other things. But it's the mind that we're stuck with on this earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so until that's over, we got to learn with it and through it and for it and all kinds of things. And so it would be easy to say, okay, well, when I walk in the forest and I'm intimate with the trees and I'm intimate with the birds and I'm intimate with the lichens and the mosses and the mushrooms and all that. But Dogen was saying something more important, which is no matter what it is, one strives to do that.
Yeah.
And if you're completely enlightened and in the state of enlightenment, by the way, that's exactly the feeling. I mean, there's nothing that's foreign or alien or that you're not intimate with. I mean, you can see a person's face and it'll look like the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. So, I mean, it's both descriptive and a little bit prescriptive.
That reminds me...
Thanks for that question, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah. That reminds me of there's a practice, like the loving kindness practice, where you picture someone you love and then you picture like a friend, and then you kind of progressively go to someone you hate.
Why don't you describe that beautiful meditation and powerful meditation to the audience? And just let me give one caveat that for some people are not suited to this or for this, so there's a little warning for those people. But go ahead and describe it for folks.
Yeah, I think there's different versions of it. The version I remember, and that I find is quite effective as well, is you start off by you visualize someone you love in front of you, and you like focus on the feelings of love you have for them, and you kind of just send your love to them. And then after you do that, you do the same thing, but instead of someone you love, it might be a friend. So someone you have positive feelings for, but you don't have like you don't normally have an intense love for, and you try to invoke that same feeling of love and towards them, and then you do it again with someone like neutral or a stranger, and same thing, and you try to invoke that same feeling of love towards them, and then the final part is like thinking of somebody you hate, and sending that and trying to invoke that same feeling of love and sending that towards them.
So thank you. That's a very good description. And the details of the practice, by the way, I think can be found in I like what is it, Kathleen McDonald's book on how to meditate. Right?
Is that where
I think she describes it? I think she describes it in there. But if not, Pema Chodron.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah, she's also very good with this one. Mm-hmm. So that's a very powerful practice, and one that's, believe me, when Dogen says we're intimate with all things, again, that's hard to do if you're not already in an enlightened state and just hanging out there. But so to practice that with politicians or with people who you otherwise have antipathy for is a very powerful practice, because not only are you controlling your mind, you're controlling your heart. Mm-hmm. And then you stop being as judgmental towards yourself and towards others. So it's not an easy practice, but it's an extremely powerful practice. Mm-hmm. And one that you could do as you go through your day, as you go to work and you see your boss that you can't stand, or you see that coworker that's really irritates you or whatever. There's another one where you breathe in, you breathe out pure, clean, beautiful smoke, clear smoke or whatever. And then when you, on the in breath, you take in the dark negativity of some of these people and you purify it. That's another practice. And again, I'm going to say, as a psychiatrist, there needs to be an asterisk here about consult your whoever your Dharma person is before trying that meditation.
That one I find more difficult because of the speed at which you have to switch.
Okay. That's possible. It also requires more setup, and this other, the loving kindness, it's just, you can do it as you're walking around. Yeah. And you should. Yeah. And then you'll see how much control you have over your mind and your heart.
Right.
Good. I think that can be useful to many people, especially if they're trying to get situated on a good foundation and get some energy and some momentum behind them in their practices. Yeah.
And then there's another kind of version of it comes to mind where after you do a stranger or something, you kind of do the whole world. You just expand it to
humanity. Poor humanity, man.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do a nation, you could do the species, right?
Yeah.
Past, present, and future. So now so although those are not Christian practices per se, they are Christian practices. They're very powerfully Christian practices, right? Mm-hmm. Jesus didn't always give that details of instructions. He did sometimes, like with the Lord's Prayer. Right, but he didn't lay down particular contemplations like that. As it was, he couldn't get his disciples to even, stand up for him after he was crucified. So, what does that teach you about the world?
Yeah.
Ultimately, it doesn't work. It's not designed to work at that level. Like Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world, right?
Right.
Okay, good. This is good stuff for folks because it covers some of the basics. Other questions as we move along here? Or comments or things you'd like to bring up? That was a good one. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know. I hate to bring back AI into it, but that's the other thing that's been on my mind.
All right. Well, AI is actually here to teach us also. Because imagine, here's a quick contemplation. Imagine you have the grandest AI in the world, right? 200 I don't know. I was going to say, never mind, whatever, 1 billion GPUs or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's not conscious.
Yeah.
What has happened? Nothing. Without consciousness, there is nothing.
Mm.
Consciousness is the awareness of that makes something possible. Otherwise, there's nothing. Think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to psychoanalyze a thermostat, what do you think you'd get? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you have 10 million thermostats, you're still going to get nothing. There's no awareness. There's no consciousness. There's no there. So I'm hopeful that as humans start to contemplate, well, what is meant by consciousness? When, if ever, will these things have consciousness? What does consciousness mean and not mean? And they stop conflating it with cognition,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Then we evolve as a species. I mean, you could look at it that way.
Yeah.
Or conceivably, when the AIs come knocking at our door, saying, "Hey, can we enter into your brains, with a device or something like that? Can you give us some tissue so we can experience too?" Then humans will realize how precious what they've been given is. Not just humans, right, but conscious, sentient beings.
Yeah.
And so, why would AI not stimulate a revolution in human thinking about what it means to be human?
Yeah. You've been reading the Diamond Age, right?
Yes. Although it gets kind of hard going after a while because it turns into the children's tale and into the
yeah.
And the story is interesting, but I started reading Ulysses because I was starved. I asked the AIs, I need great books written that are written really, really well, right?
Yeah.
And the next one on my list apparently is Ulysses, and so yeah, there's a limit to how much bad writing I can take, and I've crammed too much sci-fi into the last couple of months. And although I think I've covered the basic corpus, it's really hard when you're just when you're used to great writing like Doris Lessing and Herman Melville and people like that. So
yeah.
So,
but
and by the way, I'm tempted. If it weren't so difficult, this book Ulysses.
Yeah.
It's very interesting from a psychological, psychiatric, and Dharma point of view, because if you look at his stream of consciousness, he studied it very, very minute, very, very well, his own, and he wrote this book, which is true. This is the best representation of what goes on in a mind that I've found anywhere in literature.
How do you spell Ulysses?
In other words, it strikes accurate. Ulysses. Oh God. Uly. I don't know.
Ulysses.
Right, James Joyce. But I'm not assigning it. I'm saying that because it's difficult. But the year's 1914, and it's time for something like this, and he does a really bang up job. It's a great book. It's just one has to approach it, and it's you can approach it thousands of different ways, and people have. But one that I think is neglected is the phenomenology of the thought process in humans. What do our minds? You're going around and you hear this voice in your head.
Mm-hmm.
What does it say, and how does it act? And Joyce studied that and delivered it. So it's really quite extraordinary in that way to a psychiatrist, right?
Yeah.
And it's well written, and there's some beautiful insights in it. I mean, like the one that I posted, which just blew me away. Thought is the thought of thought. Is that right? Is that what I wrote?
Thought is I don't know.
Well, it's there on X, but contemplate that. It's quite sophisticated. All right, so yes, I am reading that book though.
I wanted to bring
the narration is just so awful too. I'm sorry. Because she puts on these fake British accents and she starts to screech at times.
Oh, the audiobook?
Yeah. By the way, I recommend Ulysses in audio. I don't think many people have had that experience. I read it. I tried to read it on a page, and I didn't get very far when I was younger. But in audio, it's much more accessible, especially with a good reader, which they do have now.
I wanted to bring up one aspect of that book. They essentially, well, actually, there's two things that I want to bring up. One, for context, it's like they create this book, which is essentially an AI that can teach a kid everything they need to learn, right?
By the way, I do recommend the Diamond Age to people. I mean, that's a more, it's small enough and readable enough, right, and easy enough or whatever. So I do recommend that, especially if you're curious about nanotechnology. But yeah, go ahead. The primer is essentially an AI,
but
with pictures.
They basically get the AI so good that it has all the knowledge. It can create images and text and all that. But what it can't do is it can't perfectly create speech.
That's interesting. That was in 1995 when you wrote that book.
And that's almost like where we're at now, because it's able to convert speech to different styles.
No, it is where we are now. It is where we are now when you think about it. Now, you could argue that developmental sensitivity, but we're just 6 months from that.
From what?
From the AI being sensitive to developmental age. And stage, and so someone will just
that's just a matter of tuning it.
Yeah, so they will tune it for they'll tune it for kids.
I think they've already done that. I think there's companies that have already done that, and there's, I think they're showing. I've seen some posts related to that, and apparently they're getting great results from it.
And they tell stories to kids that are inspiring and empowering and all that. Yeah. So I think the book is good. That's why I could recommend that book, I must say. But we're already there, right? So that's an interesting place to focus for some folks if they want to. Developmentally sensitive AIs that are safeguarded for the use of children. But the problem I see is that I don't think anyone knows what the future will be in 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to know how to prepare, just in general.
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing I keep thinking of. And as a software engineer, it's like my job seems to be in the crosshairs, right?
Yes, it is in the crosshairs. And
so, I mean, I start thinking about, well, what do I need to do to prepare? And
I think the Tao Te Ching gives the best guidance. Tao Te Ching, but then if you're a Dharma, I mean, that's for everybody, right? Everybody should try and accord with the way at that level. But for Dharma students, I think the Buddhists have the best. I mean, clearly they have the best. Impermanence, constant, change, according with it. Just to get right energies, right livelihood, right. So I may be biased, but that's what I think. I don't think guilt is going to be very useful.
No.
Now, forgiveness, which is something that the Buddhists don't emphasize, but I think it's implicit. That's something that Christians do emphasize, and I think that the world could use a lot more forgiveness. On the other hand, there's bad actors out there that should not be forgiven. They should be contained.
Right.
And so there, the Sufis come in, right? Giving ladders to thieves and enabling people to do evil.
Yeah.
Now, the Buddhists don't particularly talk about that at all. The Christians, somewhat by the example of Jesus, but I think the Sufis, more than anyone, speak to that reality. So what I'm shocked by is the number of smart people that are actually saying, okay, well, our species time is up. And they don't think it's that bad a thing.
Well, depends what that means, right? Does it mean that we're evolving to a new species? Or does that just mean we're getting annihilated?
Annihilated like the Denosovans. Have you heard of the Denosovans? I'm mispronouncing it.
Denosovans?
Denosovans. Denisovans.
Denis?
Yeah.
OV?
Yeah, just to ask. I mean, I butchered the spelling and the pronunciation, but ask it in the context of anthropology.
They are an extinct species or subspecies of archaic human that ranged across Asia during the lower and middle Paleolithic. They lived between 285,000 to 25,000 years ago.
Yeah, well, these guys were real monkeys, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're clearly, and they got annihilated, right? And then, of course, we have Neanderthal, and we have Homo habilis, and all the others that got annihilated.
Right.
And so that's their rationale, that humanity is a species that gets annihilated from time to time, and we're just getting annihilated again. Who cares?
But presumably, we all came from the same species, and so, right? If you go far back enough, we shared some common ancestry.
You don't have to go back that far, actually.
Right. And so if you look at it from that perspective, they didn't get annihilated.
Oh, no. That's why I brought up, I don't know how to pronounce it, the Denosovans or whatever.
Yeah.
They're a different branch.
But even then, if you go back far enough, there was some common ancestor between us and them.
True, but it wasn't human.
But where do you draw the line at human?
Well, this is the point, right?
Right.
And they argue that well, I would argue that you need. Well, I don't want to get off to that. I haven't studied it enough, but the argument goes something like, okay, we've been annihilated before, we'll just be annihilated again. But what they're leaving out is that without consciousness, what are we being annihilated for? I mean, you can have machines that are smart enough to, build rockets and populate the stars.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's no consciousness, it doesn't mean anything. Going back to the thermostat or the toaster.
Yeah.
Without consciousness, there's no there.
But
there's no world.
What if it's a brain in a vat connected to the AI?
If it doesn't have consciousness, okay, what kind of brain?
Could be, let's say it's a mouse brain.
Well, mice are conscious, so yeah, that would work. That's the thing. We can create consciousness into machines by adding life to them.
Right.
But life doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from, I'll just say it comes from God. It comes from the mysteries. It comes from the source of the universes in themselves. That's not something man can make.
Right.
Any more than we can make consciousness. I suspect these two are very, very closely linked. But at any rate, it comes to nothing if it's just a machine.
Right.
And so I'm hopeful that the AIs will slap some sense into us and we'll start thinking, well, wait a minute, what is it to be human? Right? Because right now there's some people who can't tell the difference between us and machines.
Yeah.
And they want to make the machines equally persons or people as us.
Well, that's just silly.
That's just mass insanity, but it's a very popular movie. Well, you just wait and see the robot rights groups.
Yeah, it's to be expected.
Well, these are some of the smartest people in Silicon Valley. And, I say Silicon Valley as if they've spread around the world.
Mm-hmm.
But these are the tech nerds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So God protect us. Anyway, it'll be very interesting.
Yeah.
Excuse me, very interesting. Anything else before we stop?
Let me see. No, I don't think so.
Okay, well, think about this. I'm going to make a statement. Humans cannot create life. they can only take life from someplace else and spawn it or reconfigure it.
Mm.
And they cannot create consciousness.
Mm.
And think about that and see if what I've said is true. And that goes for everything I say, right? You got to take it and make it your own responsibility.
What about when you have a child?
Well, what do you mean when you have a child?
Doesn't that create a new?
No, it just takes the life from the parents or from the sperm and egg, from the history of mankind and the history of the planet, of life on the planet, and it transmutes it.
Mm.
Or, I mean, it just gives it a new configuration. Have you ever heard of, what is it called, abiogenesis or something like that? I don't know the exact name for it. But people used to believe that you could get life by just mixing some things in the laboratory, because, or it would arise from just dirt because they saw maggots or some kind of worm attempt to spontaneously generate. It looked like it spontaneously generated in the ground.
Mm.
So it's not a question that hasn't been looked at before. But remember, without a live egg and without a live sperm, or at least one of them, you're not going to have life.
Right.
I'm saying life is a different category that we haven't acknowledged yet as a different category. And the same for consciousness.
Okay.
We confused it with mentation.
Okay.
Cognition. All right?
Yep.
Okay, good. Hasta luego.
All right. Thank you.
It's
Bye.
all right. Take care.